Hey guys, I told one of the students that I would make a brief video of kind of the explanations of what are on your formula sheets. So, on the front side, and I believe this is still two separate pages when you're looking at your formula sheets on the AP exam. I think this is the first page. This is the second page. So as we go through this, we'll kind of zoom into some parts. This first one, this is simply the mean. That's the sum, that symbol right there, sum of all the values divided by the number of values. Standard deviation, you don't really need this one because you're not going to do this by hand, but the sum of all of your deviations from the mean squared divided by n minus 1. Square root that whole thing, so that's your standard deviation. So this this third one, I might have to come back to that. I'm not sure if you're going to use that or not, but I can add to that one a little bit later. As we go down this list, some of these things we haven't dealt with yet because of the change in the order. This is the linear regression. Predicted y is the y-intercept, slope times x. So it's basically your y equals mx plus b. This is the calculation for your slope. Deviations from the mean for x times the deviations from the mean for y, summed up, divided by the deviations of from the mean for x squared, all summed up. Again, not a calculation you'll ever have to do by hand. This next one, b sub 0, that is your y-intercept. I guess I'll label that. So because of the calculator functions, a lot of these you won't have to use. R is your correlation coefficient. Again, we calculate that by calculator, not by hand. This is another calculation for slope, your correlation coefficient times your standard deviation of y over standard deviation of x. You may use that at some point, but of course we haven't touched that yet. Standard deviations of the slopes, again, very complicated one you're probably not going to use. We'll talk about that sometime later. Alright, so up top here we have the probability of A union B, so that's A or B, and this is the general addition rule. Probability of A plus the probability of B minus the probability of A and B, so that's the overlap. Next part is A given B. Most important thing here is that those two are the same. The second letter and the letter on the bottom, probability of B or whatever it is, needs to be on the bottom. Next up is expected value. That is also the mean. So that is the sum of all the values times their probabilities. The variance is that's the standard deviation squared. And then this is the sum of all the distances to the mean squared times each probability. Alright, moving down to the binomial distribution. Probability that x equals k. So k is usually the number of successes. So this is n choose k. That's the part that calculates the total number of ways that this could happen. And then p, so the probability of success. And then that's to the power of how many successes you want times the 1 minus b, or q as we know it, to the power of n minus the number of successes. Now, this particular formula, what I would use this for is just for your notation part. Usually we'll use binom CDF or binom PDF to calculate this. You need to calculate this yourself. The mean of x with a binomial distribution is the number of trials times the probability of success. Standard deviation, square root of the number of trials times the probability of success times the probability of failure. These two we will get into later. Mean for a proportion, observed proportion equals the proportion itself. And the standard deviation is PQ over N square root. Next part I'll probably add to a little bit more later, but I don't want to get into that right now. The back side as well, we'll mostly just get into later, except that the standardized statistic, what that's referring to is, for right now, the z-score. This will also refer to the t later on. But this is usually observed minus the mean divided by the standard deviation. And the rest of this page is inference stuff, which we are spending the second semester on. So there's that. I'll come back to it and add more to it later. See ya.